Elizabeth's father was a man who treasured love. He always professed that somewhere in the world there would be a prince destined for her. And so the prince encountered his destined princess and fell deeply in love. This marked the end of their story. Young Elizabeth inquired of her father, seeking to understand the concepts of fate and falling in love. Her father explained that love and fate were intertwined, inevitable forces that one could neither reject nor ignore. He reassured her that one day she would find her own prince, just as he had found her mother. Elizabeth, filled with curiosity, questioned the certainty of such encounters. What if she wasn't meant to be the prince's match? What if he failed to recognize her royal lineage? What if he simply passed her by without a second glance? Father advises Elizabeth, suggesting that she take the initiative and ask the prince out on a date. Elizabeth seems surprised at the suggestion, to which her father confirms, assuring her that if the prince is truly meant for her, he will recognize the signal she sends. He comforts her, telling her not to fret, bidding her sweet dreams as he affectionately calls her his princess. Elizabeth acknowledges her royal status, stating that as a princess, she naturally attracts princes. Consequently, she describes herself as not the type to swear or resort to violence. However, upon seeing her clothes scattered in the sunlight, she becomes annoyed, expressing frustration with the situation, although she typically wouldn't react in such a manner. Elizabeth vents her frustration over her missing undergarments, expressing disbelief that someone would repeatedly take her panties. She questions the motives of the perpetrator, labeling them as a crazy pervert. Her anger grows as she ponders why the thief consistently takes matching sets of bras and panties every 15 days. She also wonders why only the left shoe is taken, considering it pointless, since the remaining one will be discarded eventually. She marvels at the audacity of the thief, questioning who would dare come to her residence and commit such acts. Living far from the village where everyone else resides, Elizabeth reflects on her solitary existence in the Forbidden Forest for the past 10 years, since she was just 10 years old. Despite her isolation, she acknowledges the presence of another individual living there, though unknown to everyone else. She dismisses the possibility that this mysterious person could be responsible for the thefts, reasoning that he has been there much longer than the 2 months since her underwear started disappearing. Elizabeth concludes that the culprit must be an outsider, considering the remote location of her dwelling and the effort required to reach it. She expresses indignation at the audacity of someone stealing from a woman who struggles to make ends meet by selling wild fruit. With a shout, she vows retribution for the thefts, should she catch the perpetrator. However, she quickly calms herself, deciding to shift her focus away from the laundry thief and onto her work. Around the time Elizabeth noticed her underwear disappearing, a new feudal lord arrived in Aragon from a distant land named Karuk. When the lord's relative, the Duke of Karuk, also came to stay in the village, rumors began circulating about him, although Elizabeth remains unaffected by their presence in her daily life. While selling strawberries, she celebrates a successful day of business with only one basket remaining. However, she struggles to sell the last basket and wonders why. Suddenly, she hears someone calling out, drawing her attention. It's the feudal lord. As Elizabeth overhears the conversation about the new feudal lord and the Duke of Karuk, she realizes that the increased activity in the village is due to a speech being made in the square. Reflecting on the symbols associated with Karuk, she remembers the blue flag and armor, as well as the title of warriors instead of knights. She muses about their physical attributes, noting their broad shoulders and towering height, imagining they would excel at tasks like cutting firewood and picking fruits. Despite her initial impressions, she considers the challenges of accommodating such large individuals, anticipating they would consume significant amounts of food. Attempting to seize the opportunity, she continues to sell her strawberries, calling out to the crowd. However, she also acknowledges that her stock will likely deplete rapidly given the increased foot traffic. Elizabeth ponders the identities of the feudal lord and the duke, noting their similar physique and attire, which makes it difficult for people to distinguish between them. As she observes a man on horseback, she wonders if he could be one of them. However, she notices that his attire is neither blue nor brown, but a color she has never seen before. Despite the distance between them, she feels a strong connection to him, as if he were standing right in front of her. A man nudges Elizabeth, urging her to bow down and not to look the duke in the eye. Nervously, Elizabeth realizes that the man must be the Duke of Karuk. Meanwhile, one of the knights calls out to her as Strawberry, causing her to startle. As the man approaches her on horseback with a scowl, she can't believe the intimidating size of the Karukian warriors, wondering if they have a different type of blood flowing in them. Despite seeing them up close, their imposing stature leaves her feeling overwhelmed. The man inquires about the price of the strawberries, and Elizabeth responds that they cost 10 silver coins. As she wonders if the Duke instructed him to purchase for strawberries, she suddenly realizes that the Duke is also looking at her. Feeling a connection between them, Elizabeth recalls a story from her childhood about fated encounters. In that moment, she believes that this meeting with the Duke is destined, as if they were the only two people in the world, disconnected from everything else. The man addresses Elizabeth as Strawberry, causing her to flinch. He then shows her a handful of coins and asks which one is worth 10 silver. Confused, Elizabeth wonders if he's mocking her. Despite their nations being allied and sharing the same faith, she finds it strange that their currencies differ. Eventually, she points out the correct coin to the man. He thanks her and hands her a gold coin in exchange for the strawberries, leaving Elizabeth puzzled by the encounter. Flustered, Elizabeth addresses the man as Sir Knight, only to be corrected that he's a warrior, not a knight. She then informs him that the gold he gave her is worth much more than the strawberries. Realizing she doesn't have enough change, Elizabeth frets over not having 990 silver coins to give him. However, the warrior insists she keep the change and just give him the strawberries. Puzzled by his willingness to pay so much for a basket of strawberries, Elizabeth reflects on her own financial struggles and how shocked the warrior would be if he knew. Despite her initial hesitation, she reminds herself of her good fortune and decides to accept the payment. She acknowledges that if she didn't know the warrior had the right change, she would have accepted the gold immediately. Elizabeth politely reminds the warrior that he possesses a 10 silver coin and requests him to pay the correct amount if he intends to purchase for strawberries. Onlookers comment on Elizabeth's assertiveness, questioning why she continues to challenge the warrior and why she doesn't simply accept his offer. They also note her direct gaze at the Duke earlier. Despite their opinions, the warrior refuses to comply with Elizabeth's request, smirking at her initial refusal and then glaring at her. Elizabeth, feeling uncomfortable, yells out a firm refusal. The warrior accuses Elizabeth of trying to provoke a fight, agreeing to her challenge for a duel. Elizabeth is taken aback by his sudden declaration. The warrior specifies that the duel will take place in the square, with the condition that if he wins, Elizabeth must hand over the strawberries quietly. Confused by the situation, Elizabeth wonders what he's talking about. Suddenly, another warrior approaches and intervenes, placing a hand on the first warrior's mouth. He apologizes to Elizabeth and passes her a gold coin, revealing that the Duke requested him to give it to her. Elizabeth senses the intense gaze of the Duke of Karuk fixed upon her. Another warrior explains that Theopil, one of their companions, caused distress to a woman and wanted to offer the gold coin as an apology. Elizabeth internally questions whether her expression appears awkward, as she finds herself speaking impulsively upon spotting the Duke in the distance. She then addresses the warrior, asserting that a lady's honor cannot be restored with just one gold coin. Elizabeth reflects on her own words, finding them daring yet graceful, infused with pride and dignity. Surprised by her own eloquence, she realizes she still possesses such qualities within her. She then expresses her desire for the Duke to extend a genuine apology by inviting her to dinner, directing her request to the warrior. The Duke smiles at her suggestion. However, the warrior clarifies that he's not a knight, but a warrior. Elizabeth apologizes for the mistake and insists that he deliver her message to the Duke, to which the warrior agrees. As the warrior, Theo, starts to leave, Elizabeth calls out to him. He turns back, asking what she wants. Elizabeth offers him something in return for the Duke's apology. Theo is taken aback by her offer. Elizabeth explains that she's offering him some very delicious strawberries, which are worth more than one gold coin. She believes that although she can't win in a physical fight against him, she can still outsmart him in this way. Elizabeth asks a man if he knows the name of the Duke of Karuk. The man hesitates, but then recalls that the Duke mentioned his name as Matthias. Elizabeth repeats the name to herself. Meanwhile, visitors from the wealthiest part of Riverland express concern that Elizabeth is addressing the Duke by his name. Elizabeth wonders what kind of people they are. Since she has asked him to invite her to dinner, she expects to hear back from him soon. One of the warriors comments to Theo, advising him to develop some wit and acknowledging the bravery of the strawberry girl, noting that an ordinary lady would have likely cried in such a situation. Theo dismisses the notion, questioning what he did wrong as he was only following Matthias' instructions. Another warrior inquires about Matthias' instructions, and Theo explains that Matthias instructed him to pay generously for the strawberries as a form of apology. However, the strawberry girl refused to accept it, which Thea finds strange, attributing her behavior to her loud voice and unconventional demeanor. Matthias interjects, suggesting that the lady may have perceived Theo's actions as taunting. Shocked, Theo denies any intent to taunt her. Matthias explains that women in Karuk are few in number and thus highly valued. Harassing a married woman carries severe consequences, including the death penalty or being mobbed by a crowd. He emphasizes the risk of being killed by the woman's family even before standing trial. Demonstrating his point, Matthias strikes Theo's horse, causing it to jump and startle Theo. Theo expresses alarm, fearing he could have fallen off his horse and broken his neck due to Matthias' actions. The other warriors laugh at Theo's predicament, asserting that his strength makes any physical action akin to violence. Theo, frustrated, realizes that hitting someone weaker than himself, even in jest, constitutes harassment if the person feels teased. He acknowledges the point, admitting that Matthias could have simply explained it instead. Matthias comments on Elizabeth, recognizing her as the woman who sells fruit from the Forbidden Forest due to the unique twisted stem wood on her strawberry basket. He reflects on how her beauty and solitary existence in the Forbidden Forest have made her well known in the village. However, Matthias believes that their encounter was destined, even though Elizabeth is unaware of it. Matthias reminisces about an event that began 2 months ago and occurred every 15 days. His pet wolf, Darkin, discovered a stream in the Forbidden Forest and returned wet. Curious, Matthias followed him and found it to be a refreshing surprise, given Aragon's hot weather. He would occasionally visit the stream to bathe. However, on the 4th visit, something happened. After bathing, Matthias calls for his pet, Darkin, who leisurely emerges from among the bushes. Matthias questions Darkin's whereabouts, glaring at him as the wolf turns away. He senses something suspicious. Upon discovering Elizabeth's undergarments and clothes, Matthias accuses Darkin of wrongdoing and scolds him, reminding him that even if something smells good, he cannot take it. This marks the 4th occurrence of such behavior. Recognizing the owner of the items, Matthias finds a single shoe and ponders its small size, wondering if a woman could really wear it. A woman's underwear in a basket emitting the scent of fruit mingled with floral, grassy, and fruity aromas, along with the scent of her clothes, created a fragrant ambience. Matthias is perplexed by Darkin's unexpected behavior and wonders why the wolf would defy his instructions in such a vulgar manner. Initially, he didn't dwell on the matter. However, upon encountering the items a second time, he finds it too strange to dismiss as a coincidence. Recognizing that the underwear is different from what he saw 15 days ago, Matthias questions why a woman's belongings are scattered in the area. Considering that the forest is forbidden and presumed uninhabited, he investigates further and learns about her existence from the locals. On the 3rd occurrence, Matthias begins to suspect that Darkin may have been the one bringing the underwear. Finally, catching him in the act confirms his suspicions. He chastises Darkin for stealing from a poor woman and decides to withhold food from him as punishment. Despite this, Darkin groans in response. Matthias reflects on the woman living alone in the Forbidden Forest, surmising that she must have her own issues. He dismisses any interest in someone like her, asserting that he doesn't have time for romantic pursuits. However, he recalls Elizabeth's request to be invited to dinner with the Duke, prompting him to reconsider his stance. Matthias ultimately decides to give Elizabeth 1 gold coin as reimbursement for the items taken from her. Matthias expresses frustration over being continually suggested meetings with prostitutes due to his unmarried status and decides he must meet the woman in question. Theo questions if he means the strawberry girl who sells strawberries, to which Matthias confirms, stating she keeps coming to mind. He recalls their memorable encounter and expresses a desire to obtain her personal details and invite her to the castle respectfully, suggesting tonight as it has been over a week. He is confident she will remember him when she sees him, recalling their prolonged eye contact during their dramatic meeting. Matthias questions if the warrior advised him to meet anyone he can, to which the warrior confirms, albeit with hesitation, regarding the particular girl in question due to the attention she attracts. Nonetheless, Matthias insists he is merely curious about her and wants to meet and talk to her. The warrior reflects on this being the first time Matthias has shown interest in a girl like this and wonders if it's a good sign or a bad one. Despite pledging his life to Karuk, marriage holds significance for Karukian men, making love a special and rare emotion. Ultimately, the warrior agrees, expressing hope that the girl is a good person. The brother and sister bow to Ellie in gratitude, and she smiles, allowing them to continue on their way. Finding them cute, Ellie reflects on the struggles faced by large families who have to share food and children who go without proper meals due to their parents' business. She believes that people's situations have deteriorated due to the incompetence of the former feudal lord and the temple's sole focus on constructing a combat rink for over 20 years. She expresses a wish for lightning to strike and burn it all down, or for someone to start a fire there. Ellie nervously heads towards a shoe store, pondering the idea that it doesn't hurt to ask. She then approaches the shopkeeper and politely inquires if it's possible to buy just 1 shoe. Recalling a previous encounter with the same shopkeeper, Ellie remembers his comments about her living in the Forbidden Forest. In the past, the shopkeeper had remarked on her appearance, expressing admiration and questioning if she needed anything other than shoes, which made Ellie feel uncomfortable. Ellie reflects on having no other option but to visit the shop despite feeling uncomfortable around the shopkeeper. The shopkeeper comments on her infrequent visits, complimenting her increasing beauty. Ellie responds uneasily, explaining that the other shoe store is closed. However, the shopkeeper continues, asking if she feels lonely in the dark Forbidden Forest at night, which annoys Ellie. In response to her annoyance, the shopkeeper approaches, noting her feisty temper and likening it to the thorn on a rose, which only makes a man want to pluck it more. Ellie glares in response. Ellie recalls her childhood, remembering her nanny's advice that the capital wasn't the right place for her, and that she should live somewhere nicer. Despite her mother's wishes for her nanny to take care of her, it was decided that it was best for Ellie to leave the capital. Ellie reminisces about running away to Aragon, only to find it unfriendly towards outsiders. She faced difficulty selling her horse at a fair price and had to settle for an awful deal to buy food. Lodging was similarly challenging with exorbitant prices or unreasonable demands. Even at a young age, Ellie could sense the plots and schemes unfolding at night. She reflects on the corrupt, vicious, and cruel nature of the world, where a girl with no connections had no one to turn to for help. Ellie grabs a shoe and hits the shopkeeper, ranting angrily at him. The shopkeeper in turn expresses anger at Ellie for hitting him and questions her sense of entitlement due to his earlier compliment. He's about to slap Ellie when suddenly Zealous, the only son of the owner of the third largest bank in Aragon, intervenes, demanding to know what is happening. The shopkeeper freezes in response. Ellie expresses surprise upon seeing Zealous. Zealous then informs the shopkeeper that he has heard about the late payment of this month's interest, and his father instructed him to collect it now. Zealous and Ellie engage in a conversation. Zealous expresses his disbelief, telling Ellie that she's out of her mind. Ellie responds defensively, reminding Zealous of his young age. Zealous adjusts his approach and asks Ellie how she could act the way she did towards the warriors. Ellie is confused and embarrassed by the topic being brought up. Zealous mentions that the whole market and everyone in Aragon knows about it. He mimics Ellie's words about inviting her to dinner with the Duke. Ellie feels frustrated by the situation. Zealous asks Ellie if she would go to dinner if the Duke invited her. Ellie dismisses the idea, considering it absurd for a duke to dine with a girl who sells strawberries in the market. Zealous expresses concern, suggesting that if the duke truly had discerning eyes, he might see something more in Ellie. He understands that while Ellie is kind to children and women in the village, she adopts a tough demeanor towards men to avoid appearing weak. Ellie brushes off the conversation, stating that it's in the past. Zealous reflects on Ellie's resilience, acknowledging that despite her tough exterior, she always shines brightly. Zealous asks Ellie if she has feelings for the Duke. Ellie grins, indicating that her outrageous statement was made for that reason. Zealous wonders how she could have feelings for someone she just met, especially since he was the one who initially approached her. He describes the Duke as charming even to a man with a low, gentle voice and a commanding presence. Despite not being the new feudal lord, he seems to hold significant authority. Zealous appears sullen, implying that the Duke possesses qualities that make him captivating. Zealous asks Ellie if she would go back to Karuk with the Duke if he asked. Ellie laughs and pats his head, teasing him about missing his older sister. Zealous, feeling embarrassed, tells her to stop treating him like a kid despite being only 2 years younger. In their childhood, Zealous affectionately called Ellie Sis when they first met, which made them both happy. Ellie persuades Zealous to believe that he will meet a nice woman who suits him well. Zealous starts to express his feelings, but Ellie interrupts him by putting her hand over his mouth, telling him to stop and be quiet. Ellie grumbles about Zealous looking like her little brother, admitting that if he didn't resemble him so much, she would have left him in the streets. Zealous concludes that Ellie is scary. Ellie drops Zealous off at his home and tells him that from now on he's on his own. Zealous reacts sadly, pouting, and expresses feeling abandoned. Ellie advises him to go wash up and sleep to avoid getting in trouble with his dad. When Zealous tries to hug her, Ellie dodges him, causing him to fall, and he sobs, feeling like Ellie dumped him. Ellie warns him to stay away from alcohol, and Zealous concludes that Ellie is a heartless woman. Ellie sighs and tries to reassure him, but then she hears a sound and ponders about the person in the blue cape. The warrior hides from Ellie and ponders, realizing that Ellie isn't the woman they're discussing. He's concerned, thinking that a loose woman like Ellie couldn't become Matthias' wife. He believes that Karukian men, who typically give their hearts to only one woman, must be careful when choosing a partner, as women who are treated dearly often stray and have affairs with other men. He considers women from outside of Karuk to be even worse in this regard. The warrior admits that he intended to observe Ellie for a short while before delivering the invitation, but witnessing how many men she interacted with in just a week, he decides he's observed her long enough. He concludes that she's not the one for Matthias and resolves to find another woman for him. He emphasizes that all Karukian men have only one ideal type of woman in mind, a woman who would never cheat on him. The warrior deceives Matthias, who is taken aback by Ellie's apparent refusal of his invitation. Matthias reflects on the timing of her response, noting that while a week's delay might not be frowned upon in Aragon, it would be considered impolite in Karuk. He expresses surprise, assuming that Ellie's bold request for dinner indicated her intention to accept. The warrior hints that Ellie might already be in a relationship, planting doubt in Matthias's mind. Matthias considers Ellie's supposed rejection, finding it hard to believe she could have found a boyfriend in just a week. He questions why she would be bold toward him if she were already dating someone. Reflecting on his own experience of being disrespectfully refused for the first time, he instructs Alexis to cancel the dinner reservation, stating that he is not hungry. He dismisses Alexis. Alexis leaves Matthias's room and contemplates his disappointment, realizing it's for the best to end things before Matthias encounters Ellie again. Meanwhile, Theo inquires about Ellie, prompting Alexis to hesitate before responding. Alexis denies lying to Matthias and expresses his belief that Ellie isn't suitable for Matthias. He acknowledges that while Matthias is usually careful and doesn't make mistakes, sometimes emotions can't be controlled. Theo agrees, sharing his fifth eldest brother's warning to be cautious of women. Earlier, Matthias observes Theo in his underwear and feels unhappy. Theo offers an excuse, stating that the weather is hot and humid, making clothes uncomfortable. Matthias remains unsatisfied and questions the validity of Theo's excuse. He reflects on the vast difference between Aragon and Karuk, noting the difficulty the warriors of Karuk face in adjusting to this foreign land even after 3 months. Matthias explains that this is why he terminated all the employees in the castle upon his arrival. Theo acknowledges Matthias' actions, recognizing that he terminated the employees for the benefit of all the brothers and hears about the generous severance pay they received. Matthias reflects on the potential repercussions if other aristocrats discover the lack of etiquette among the brothers. He questions Theo about his bare feet, to which Theo confidently responds that it's too hot and stuffy to wear shoes. Matthias challenges Theo about being called a barbarian while dressed in such a manner, to which Theo defends himself, citing the unbearable heat as the reason for his attire. Matthias feels his head throbbing in frustration as he expresses how Theo's actions are driving him crazy. Theo responds, stating that he's the one feeling crazed, arguing that their current isolation renders societal norms irrelevant. Matthias reminds Theo that he already provided everyone with time to adjust to their new environment. He emphasizes that while they may have been equals in Karuk, they are now viewed as aristocrats and revered as knights in this new land. However, due to the hot weather, many warriors stroll around with minimal clothing. They engage in weightlifting and exercise routines wherever they please. Theo hands over a piece of paper containing all the information he gathered on Strawberry. It details Elizabeth Hale, a young woman who resides alone without any family in the Forbidden Forest. The people of Aragon avoid that area for a valid reason, as something terrifying resides within it. Theo then warns Matthias to consider his decision carefully, as marriage is a commitment with no easy way out. Matthias contemplates the situation, realizing he has been deceived. Matthias writes a letter to Elizabeth, addressing himself as Matthias Lenarch, the Duke of Karuk. He apologizes deeply for the shameful incident that occurred in Waterford, acknowledging his misunderstanding. He expresses hope for her adjustment to the cold weather in Karuk and in Aragon. Matthias then explains the situation with his wolf, describing it as a mystical creature that has outlived him by far. He confesses that for the past 2 months he has wanted to apologize for his wolf stealing her belongings and expresses a desire to meet her. Despite their initial encounter being through an unfortunate incident, he sees it as the fateful beginning of their relationship, which feels like more than just a coincidence. Matthias reflects on his desire to explain everything and understand why Elizabeth has been occupying his thoughts for over a week. However, he feels it's futile now. He questions whether the strange feeling they shared when they looked at each other was only experienced by him. He admits to asking about her background information to prevent any mistakes, but acknowledges the document contains a complicated family history that could fuel gossip. He debates internally whether it's ethical to gather information about her in this secretive manner and decides to stop reading and turn the document over. Darkin howls, prompting Matthias's frustration as he questions if Darkin plans to continue all day. Matthias notes that it's the 15th day of the month, recalling that Darkin was quiet the last time they stayed in. He acknowledges that every 15th day is when he unintentionally made contact with her. Reluctantly, Matthias agrees to Darkin's behavior. On the other side, Ellie, holding a bat determinedly, vows to catch the thief. She reflects on not being prepared the last time but asserts her readiness now. She promises to teach the thief the real meaning of humiliation once caught and calls out for them to show themselves. In the midnight, Ellie waits for the thief. She hears a rustling sound from outside and declares, "He's here, that thief." The thief intends to steal Ellie's undergarments again, but Ellie catches him. The thief halts, shocked, and addresses Ellie by name. Ellie expresses annoyance and questions the shopkeeper's presence, identifying him as the shoemaker. The shopkeeper offers an excuse, stating he came to apologize for the previous incident and advises Ellie to relax. Suspicious, Ellie ponders the shopkeeper's late-hour apology. He peers inside, noticing Ellie lives alone, and Ellie reluctantly accepts the apology, setting bedtime and bids him farewell. As Ellie begins to close the door, the shopkeeper pushes it open, insisting on being welcome as a guest. Ellie retorts, stating a guest is someone who has been invited and questions when she ever invited him. The shopkeeper, attempting to enter, comments on Ellie's spirited demeanor. Ellie questions why she should acquiesce to his demands and asks him to leave. Angered, the shopkeeper expresses frustration at Ellie's perceived arrogance. Ellie continues to struggle, urging him to depart and insults him in the process. Despite her defiance, Ellie realizes the danger of being alone with him in a confined space with no means of escape. Ellie opens the door, causing the shopkeeper to fall to the floor. She confronts him, expressing surprise at his presence and admonishing his behavior for coming at such a late hour. The shopkeeper responds with insults and threats. Angered by his words, Ellie beats him with a bat, calling him out for being an underwear thief and cursing at her. She reflects on her daily practice of swinging the bat, understanding its importance in situations like this. The shopkeeper remains motionless, prompting concern from Ellie about whether she struck him too hard. She worries about the possibility of being accused of murder. Ellie checks his breath and is relieved to find he is still breathing. Despite the incident being self-defense, Ellie feels stressed, fearing potential life imprisonment if things go awry. She drags him away from her home to a distant location, hoping he remains unconscious until morning. Reflecting on her decision to settle in the secluded forest, Ellie understands its difficulty of access for men, which influence her choice to live there. Ellie considers the implications of leaving the shopkeeper outside, recognizing the risk of his body temperature dropping. She contemplates whether to fetch him a blanket, finding the situation absurd. Suddenly, the shopkeeper regains consciousness and begins to protest, accusing Ellie of luring him there and assaulting him. Ellie reacts with anger, expressing regret that she didn't strike him harder to keep him unconscious. She counters his accusations, reminding him of his role as the underwear thief and threatening to report him first. The shopkeeper flinches. The shopkeeper defends himself, denying any involvement in stealing Ellie's underwear and claiming it's his first time visiting. He challenges Ellie to provide proof of his alleged thievery. Ellie counters, arguing that his presence alone is evidence enough, suggesting he must have been there before to find his way there again. The shopkeeper threatens Ellie, asserting he can claim she lured him there and points to the bruise marks as evidence of her assault. Ellie becomes scared. The shopkeeper attempts to intimidate Ellie with a veiled threat, suggesting a compromise to avoid trouble by insinuating a sexual proposition. Ellie responds by tightening her grip on the bat, daring him to report her and threatening to retaliate freely before going to prison. She berates him for being a lowly underwear-stealing thief and refuses to succumb to his intimidation tactics. The shopkeeper, sweating nervously, wonders why Ellie isn't afraid of him. As Ellie prepares to strike him with the bat, the shopkeeper panics and swears he didn't steal her underwear. Ellie, fueled by anger, accuses him of lying and questions who else would venture into the forest besides him. Just then, Darkin is seen by the shopkeeper carrying Ellie's undergarments in his mouth. The shopkeeper points towards Darkin, trying to divert Ellie's attention. Ellie distrusts the shopkeeper's intentions and warns him not to deceive her. However, the shopkeeper persists, urgently calling Ellie's name and directing her gaze towards Darkin. Ellie reluctantly looks behind her and sees Darkin, causing both her and the shopkeeper to feel scared at the sight of the wild animal in the forest. As Darkin growls, Ellie quickly flees from the scene. Ellie, exhausted from running, comes to a halt, realizing she can't continue any longer. Feeling scared and vulnerable, she worries about the possibility of the wolf chasing after her and realizes she has ventured too deep into the woods. She recalls not having ventured this far since childhood and notes the darkness that permeates the dense forest due to the towering trees. Suddenly, the shopkeeper catches up to Ellie, panting and expressing surprise at the darkness of the forest. He expresses disbelief at the existence of monstrous wolves like Darkin in the forest and inquires whether there are many other dangerous creatures residing there. Ellie reflects on the forest's ominous reputation as the Forbidden Forest, acknowledging that while it's not officially restricted, people avoid entering for a reason. She admits it was her first time encountering Darkin as well. The shopkeeper expresses surprise at Ellie's unfamiliarity with the forest despite running all the way there, asking if she knows the way back. Ellie confesses that she doesn't know the way back, revealing that she came to the forest out of desperation with nowhere else to go and only discovered its secrets upon arrival. The shopkeeper expresses frustration, warning Ellie about the dangers of being lost in the forest and questioning her decision to run without thinking. Ellie defends herself, stating that she never asked him to follow her and blames him for the situation arising due to his late-night visit to her house. The shopkeeper counters with a lie, claiming Ellie flirted with him to entice him to come. Ellie retorts, explaining that she doesn't treat men kindly for precisely this reason. They often misinterpret her actions and accuse her of flirting when she hasn't. She reveals the consequences of such misunderstandings, where she's unjustly labeled and rumors are spread about her. Ellie, thinking calmly, realizes there's no time to argue with the shopkeeper in this situation. She tries to reason with him, stating that there's no time for such discussions here and now. However, the shopkeeper persists, attempting to touch her despite her stepping back. Ellie warns him about the forest master and urges him to leave immediately, raising her voice to emphasize her point. Ignoring her warnings, the shopkeeper grabs her hand, but suddenly Matthias grabs Ellie from behind and shoves the shopkeeper away. Ellie freezes, unable to comprehend the warmth and size of the body behind her. It's not who she expected. Turning around, she confronts the stranger, demanding to know his identity. The stranger introduces himself as Matthias, the Duke of Karuk, explaining that he has no last name. Startled by this revelation, Ellie questions whether he truly is the Duke. Matthias confirms his identity, affirming that he is indeed the Duke. Meanwhile, the jealous shopkeeper assumes that Matthias's presence in the Forbidden Forest at such a late hour must be for a specific reason. He jumps to conclusions, suspecting that Ellie and Matthias are together and wonders since when they got involved. Matthias, addressing Ellie, suggests they've met before and asks if she doesn't recognize him. Ellie, swayed by his gentle and caring demeanor, feels a sense of trust towards the Duke. She admits she couldn't recognize him in the dark. Matthias acknowledges her response. Ellie notices Matthias' great voice but wonders what he looks like up close, lamenting that she can't see him clearly in the darkness. Ellie notices Matthias' wet clothes and asks him about it, but he hesitates to respond. Sensing his discomfort, Ellie reassures him that he doesn't need to explain if he doesn't want to and reminds him of the urgency of the situation with the wolf in the forest. However, their conversation is interrupted by the shopkeeper's screams of pain as Darkin drags him away. The shopkeeper calls out for Ellie's help, causing her to feel frightened. Matthias, witnessing Ellie's fear, expresses regret for unintentionally scaring her. Ellie urges Matthias to hold her hand and lead them to her house, assuring him it's the safest place until sunrise. She grabs his hand and pulls him, urging him to hurry. Matthias pauses, causing Ellie to implore him to run away with her. However, Matthias explains that this is the way out. Ellie realizes her mistake and they continue walking together hand in hand. Reflecting on their joined hands, Ellie recalls a past memory of being lost and crying in the dark forest, where someone with cold hands but a gentle touch led her out. Comparing it to the present, she notes the Duke's hand feels hard yet warm. Ellie expresses astonishment at the appearance of a great wolf in the forest, a rare occurrence in her 10 years of living there. She attributes this anomaly to the forest's master, who prohibits large animals from residing there. Concerned about the shopkeeper's fate, Ellie wonders if he's likely dead. Matthias adds that the forest master doesn't spare any people he encounters, suggesting that the shopkeeper may be better off with the wolf. Pondering the situation, Matthias speculates that Darkin is likely just intimidating the shopkeeper rather than intending to harm him fatally. He predicts that the shopkeeper will regret his encounter with the wolf. Matthias reveals that he knows the shopkeeper doesn't like wolves. Ellie is surprised and questions what he means by that, acknowledging that Matthias knows the forest better than she does. Matthias explains that he has good night vision and visits the stream in the forest every 15 days, but he finds it challenging to adapt to the weather there. Ellie realizes that's why he's wet. Nervously, she asks what he meant by the shopkeeper not liking wolves and if he knows something about the forest's master. Ellie wonders if the Duke's visit to the forest was truly just to take baths or if there was another motive. She expresses concern about whether the Duke might overhear them now, reflecting on her previous fear. Ellie explains that the master of the forest dislikes being the subject of gossip and avoids exposure to sunlight. Matthias admits that the wolf named Darkin is a mystical animal symbolizing the protector of Karuk. He apologizes for not explaining earlier. Ellie, shocked by this revelation, smiles and reassures Matthias that it's all right since he has apologized. Matthias continues explaining that Darkin has a liking for Ellie's belongings, leading her to realize that Darkin was the one with her underwear in his mouth. Ellie then confirms with astonishment if Matthias's wolf is the culprit behind the missing underwear. Matthias admits that his knowledge of the forest is limited to what he's heard from the locals. Despite frequenting the forest with Darkin, he's never encountered the master of the forest. Pondering this, he remarks on the master's adeptness at hiding. Matthias hopes that his explanation clarifies matters. Ellie wonders if there's anything in the world that scares Matthias. She observes his strength and power, noting his companionship with a formidable wolf like Darkin. Matthias warns Ellie about the danger posed by the master of the forest, advising her to steer clear of him despite his past protection. Ellie reflects on the unusual situation of discussing such a secret with the Duke from Karuk. Suddenly, the master of the forest appears behind them, addressing Ellie. He remarks on her attempt to leave food for him, but he finds it unsuitable for his tastes. Observing their intertwined hands, Ellie notices that his voice remains unchanged. Feeling hesitant, she releases Matthias' hand and addresses the master as Oswald, recalling that it's the same voice she heard when she first arrived in the forest 10 years ago. Oswald greets Ellie and remarks that he can sense her fear of the dark. Ellie, with tears in her eyes, denies being afraid, attributing her unease to the inability to see clearly. Oswald notes the sound of her pounding heart and inquires about her reason for coming to the forest. Ellie admits that she ran there. Oswald questions if others forced her into the forest. Perplexed, Ellie asks if she's not supposed to come there. Oswald explains that people fear a monster in the forest, which is why it's avoided by everyone. Ellie reflects on Oswald's refined manner of speaking, his blonde hair, blue eyes, and luxurious attire, which clearly indicate his high status. She wonders why someone of his caliber is present in the forest. Despite her unease, Ellie extends her hand to Oswald, addressing him as Sir Count, and suggests they find a sunny spot together. She believes that being together would alleviate their fear of the darkness. Oswald lowers his hand for her to take, and as Ellie flinches, she realizes that when he grabbed her hand, she instinctively understood. Oswald is the feared monster of the forest. Oswald inquires if Ellie is scared, to which she nervously denies, attributing her anxiety to his hand holding her own. Despite seeking solace in the forest away from people, Ellie expresses her realization that no one would come to her aid in times of danger. She reflects sadly that even in a village full of people, she felt no difference in her situation. Ellie admits that she came to the forest because she felt she had no other choice. Aragon was unwelcoming to outsiders without any connections to the area. In contrast to Newcastle, Aragon felt like a rural village. This was one of the reasons why Ellie chose to come to Aragon, but she found the people to be very territorial. They didn't even offer a piece of bread to a hungry young outsider. Instead, Oswald allowed her to stay in the forest where she had nowhere else to go. However, in return, he told her that he would bite her neck in 10 years when she grew up and became an adult. Ellie asks Oswald if he's going to kill her. Oswald responds by questioning why he would wait 10 years if his intention was just to kill her. He ominously suggests that she will never see the light again and will thirst for blood in the darkness, ultimately becoming a monster like him. Nervously, Ellie questions what would happen if she refuses. As she voices her concerns, she realizes that Oswald harbors hatred towards her without any apparent reason. Oswald coldly states that there's no reason for him to let her live. Ellie reflects on her situation, realizing that while she doesn't desire to live forever, choosing isolation over death is the better option. She feels compelled to live for at least 10 years, motivated by her parents' sacrifice for her survival. Despite the loneliness and hardships, Ellie acknowledges that her circumstances remain unchanged. She understands that both she and the Count are alone in their respective worlds. Ellie recognizes the necessity of protection for a child to survive in a cruel world. Despite feeling unable to refuse the promise Oswald imposed on her, she empathizes with him, realizing that he is in a similar situation to hers. Grateful for the protection Oswald provided, she acknowledges that he allowed her to live in the forest as promised. Ellie recalls being summoned to the feudal lord's castle one day. The feudal lord comments on her modest attire, assuming she lives in the nearby village. Nervously, Ellie corrects him, stating that she lives in the Forbidden Forest. The feudal lord inquires about the duration of her stay there, to which Ellie responds, mentioning she has lived there for about 2 years. Curious, the feudal lord asks if the one in the forest knows of her existence. Excitedly, Ellie mentions Lord Oswald, causing the feudal lord to flinch. She enthusiastically shares her positive experiences, describing Oswald as kind and caring, recounting how he provides food and teaches her survival skills like starting a fire. Ellie questions the feudal lord about his knowledge of Oswald, mentioning Oswald's claim that nobody knows about him. However, the feudal lord dismisses her after her revelation. Since that encounter, Ellie notes that no one of high status has called for her, viewing it as a form of protection provided by Oswald through the feudal lord. Under his care, she felt safe and managed to survive the last 10 years. However, she admits to occasionally stumbling upon old human bones in the forest and noticing Oswald's indifference towards them. Over time, she begins to understand from village rumors how Oswald has lost his human qualities. As a result, she starts to fear him, feeling the weight of her promise to him. Oswald, once her protector, becomes someone she now fears. Oswald questions Ellie about her impending adulthood, confirming it is this month. He reminds her not to forget her promise, cautioning her against mixing with others, whom he describes as tenacious, fierce, and brutal. Ellie wonders who he is referring to as they. Suddenly, Matthias' abrupt interruption startles her, prompting her to grab his hand. As Oswald departs, he advises Ellie to remember his words, emphasizing that animals are just animals regardless of how loyal they may seem. Ellie is puzzled by Oswald's decision to let them go freely. She reflects that Oswald typically doesn't tolerate strangers intruding into the forest. She considers that Oswald neither likes the Duke nor smells like the shopkeeper who intruded earlier. Ellie notices that Matthias appears well-groomed from head to toe. Hearing rustling sounds, Ellie flinches and Matthias hugs her. Darkin arrives at the scene. Matthias acknowledges Darkin's presence and Ellie expresses relief, stating that they were fortunate. Ellie reflects on her gratitude towards the wolf despite initially being scared of it. She feels relieved that Matthias is safe. She observes that Matthias appears to be a well-bred aristocrat with a strong physique. Ellie expresses concern about Matthias being cold, but he reassures her he's fine. She mentions the risk of catching a cold when wet at night, feeling internally frustrated because she wants to keep hugging him longer. Matthias acknowledges her concern and promises to be careful.